Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, the podcast that provides you with the knowledge and insights you need to achieve physical, mental, and financial well-being. I'm your host, Arlen Piggott, a business consultant who's passionate about helping people achieve a more balanced and healthier life. Each week, we'll deep dive into topics related to health and wealth, including retirement income planning, innovative healthcare solutions, alternative funded health plans, and specific actions individuals and business owners can take to gain control of their finances, have access to affordable quality health care, and achieve peace of mind. We'll also be joined by innovative experts who will share their knowledge and insights on prevalent topics. So, whether you're looking to grow your wealth or improve your health, you've come to the right place. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's get started. Well, howdy ho there, neighbors. It is time for another episode of the Health and Wealth Power Hour, and we have a heck of a treat for you today. The gentleman that is going to be joining us, name is Marty Strong, and Marty is a retired Navy SEAL, a very successful businessman, and also the author of 9 books, soon to be 10, as I got the inside scoop on. Very, very cool stuff. Guys, we're going to talk about change. We're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of business that are going to affect you in every single day in every single way, whether you have a company of 1 or a company of 1,000. Welcome aboard the Health and Wealth Power Hour, Marty Strong.
Thanks for having me, Harlan.
So we had some great conversations even before we get on. This is just the story of my whole podcast career. Is I think I have better conversations before the podcast starts than we actually have on here a lot of times. But that is because I really like to get to know genuinely who you are a little before we get talking. And you've got a very diverse background. You are not afraid to do your research on things, as I learned. But one thing we both agreed on is that change is inevitable in many things. And that is the focus on your newest book. And I want to start there, and then we'll kind of work our way backwards to some of the other books, including, I guess, the first one that you wrote which was Be Nimble. But talk a little bit about your new book coming out. December 1st is when it's released, Be Different. What got you going down that path? Or was it just an absolute move forward from Be Nimble, Be Visionary, Be Different, because it is kind of the pathway that people would take?
Well, it wasn't a natural progression from Be Visionary, the second book, where Be Visionary was a natural progression from Be Nimble. The genesis of it was I'm on a board of a nonprofit called Best Robotics. And Best Robotics has been around for about 31, almost 32 years now. It was created by 2 Texas Instruments engineers. And what they tried to do is create a program that would be eventually national, where 6th to 12th graders had to look at a problem set, and they had 8 weeks to build a robot to deal with whatever the situation was that the problem set reflected. And at the same time, build a company around it with marketing plans, websites, and a convention booth, and all these things would be scored so that the business aspect of it, the creating a business, would also be scored to the point where you could actually ace all those and not do so well in the actual robotics competition and still win. So it wasn't just weighted heavily on the robotics. And the robotics they don't fight each other, and it's not a kit like a lot of the other national robotics competitions do. They give you a kit, you build the kit, you go and you compete. These kids would come up with whatever the solution was to the problem set. I'll give you an example. A year ago, the problem set was a human body, and the framework's laid out on the floor of usually a university basketball gym that's been converted into a competitive environment. And the robots had to go in and do remote surgery, like the Da Vinci surgical robot. Had to go in and either remove things or place things and do things interfacing with this human-shaped footprint. And there's a time constraint. So there's points for different things. The most difficult thing, think like the old game Operation, the most difficult the task, the higher the points. So they have to game this thing through and figure out, do I go for the gusto or do I go for all the easy points? So the year before that was supply chain. This was all about moving cargo and everything. And you go to these competitions and the entire arena is filled with thousands and thousands of parents and fans. And you got these teams from 12 to 17 kids per team. And if there's, say, 15 teams out there, there's 15 uniquely designed robot solutions. So there's 15 different opinions and ideas and dreams that have become reality to deal with the exact same problem set, which is unique in that if you go like to college or you go to some of these other types of competitions, they're told what to do. They're told how to do the physics. They're told how to construct it. And what you do is you get similarity. Everybody kind of comes out with the same mousetrap, maybe a different color, whatever, but pretty much everybody's just following the course of the instruction. These kids aren't being taught this. So when I was added to the board after helping them with a strategic review, I started going to the, board meetings and talking to them, the engineers on the board also going to the competition. And I noticed that they weren't being taught anything. And I kept asking questions. Well, none of you engineers are teaching these kids this stuff. How are they being so creative and collaborative? How are they communicating? Like, there's no hierarchy of leadership. And in between the 10 rounds of competition, they come back and whatever they saw happen right or wrong with their robots, they can rapidly prototype between rounds. And they've got Dremel tools and stuff, and they can reconfigure whatever they have to do, software, hardware. And basically what it comes down to is they don't know the rules, so they don't know they're breaking any rules. They're not following any rules. They're not trying to comply with any instruction. So they're free to create whatever the heck they think makes sense. An easy way to get a grasp of this is when kids are told to go do a division problem, and they're taught a way to do the division problem. And there's that one kid in class that gets the right answer, but did it a different way. Because you can do division lots of different ways. They can see the solution, the path, they executed it. So observing all this, I started talking to brain scientists and I started talking to educators that were running big schools, trying to make a difference in kind of focused on creativity and letting the human mind kind of run its course a little bit instead of constraining it and just memorizing the past information of all the different subjects you might want to pick up, which is the way schools teach, by the way. It's a history lesson in every category. And what I figured out was, along with the brain science, that the mind is actually in gear, has two different switches. We're designed to explore and to take risks, but it's kind of scrubbed and smashed out of us when we're young. And that combined with what I was seeing with the kids and my own, I have 5 kids. So you start looking at that and you say, all right, so everybody's supposed to conform and obey and follow the rules and follow the guidance and get the right score and do the math problem the right way, quote unquote. And so by the time you get to be 16, 17, 18, you pretty much don't take risks. You don't raise your hand and try to come up with a different way. You're not rewarded for that. You're rewarded for being normal. You're not rewarded for being different. And what I mean by being different, I'm talking about thinking different. And that's where the root lies in the destruction of our creative juices. It's not because we have because we've hit puberty and suddenly our creative sense of awe like we had when we were 6 or 7 years old just disappears from our brain. As long as you don't have a medical condition, you have the same functioning brain and the same capabilities when you're 80 or 90. So all of that being said, I thought, how do I capture all this in a book? And I looked at research that was out there. And so I built the book based on all these different kind of revelations and the combination of things I was seeing in different groups, like educators that were trying something different and brain scientists that were finding something different, and my own observations of best robotics.
That's fascinating because, one of the things that we like to say is we don't think outside of the box. We just got rid of the box. That's actually what they did without realizing it. That's what they did for these kids, right? They didn't even tell them there was a box there. If they didn't give them a box to begin with, they never even considered there was one. That really is fascinating. And it does make me think too. My daughter is dyslexic, and there's been so many times that she was taught a certain way to do something and she just couldn't grasp it. She just did it her own way. And then, of course, it's like, well, you can't do it like that because, well, no, I got the right answer. What do you mean I can't do it like that? She just thinks differently, right? But she was always in school anyway, because school is meant to teach everyone to be the same. Always told you're doing it the wrong way, even when she got the right answer, which is very frustrating to her.
Right. If they were teaching creativity, they'd teach you the prescribed way of doing the math. And then they tell you, now find a different way to do it, get in groups of three, and see if you can come up with the same answer with a different way of arriving at it. All right. Now you're getting into a different way of operating and exercising the brain. And of course, that's done in special schools. It's done in some private schools. It's part of it is if nobody really understands this is happening writ large, they don't know that a public school system's not really addressing this at all. It's actually the part of the problem. And then it's just as bad when you get out of public school. You go into college and they're teaching the history of everything. And then you get out of college, you go get your first job, and they tell you where to park, where to eat, when to show up. You go into the conference room as a brand new person and they're talking about a problem they're trying to solve, and you've got a pretty good idea. You raise your hand, they all look at you like you have three heads. It's not your time. You don't have the title, And so what happens 2 years later? You've stopped raising your hand.
Yeah.
Because you're either ostracized or you look like a threat or an idiot in that social group because you haven't paid your dues. So this keeps on going.
So a question, let's go back a second to the public school system to kids. I like using math as an option because there's a lot of way to skin that cat, right? There's a lot of way to get that answer. I think you used a good one in division, but it really doesn't make any difference. And maybe you don't know the answer to this question, but do other countries that seem to be much more successful in some of the sciences and mathematics, are they a little more free thinking in their way? As their kids are brought up in their school systems, are they allowing them a little more open mind thoughts? I really don't know the answer. I was curious.
The two that I know for sure that are very effective in their education is India and Japan. And I know that in both cases, what they're really effective at is making sure the kids walk away having actually achieved and memorized everything in the curriculum. So they score really, really high in standard curriculum. They score really, really high, say, in our comparable testing for colleges here. I've talked to a guy who runs a similar robotics type program in India, and he was talking to me. He said, "Look, here's the problem in India. We've done such a great job in our school system of copying the old British system, and every child comes out of there, like a A+ aptitude in what they were taught. But there's no risk taking allowed. There's no choice allowed." So that said, they said that the Indian government has created these huge incubation networks all over India, where you can go in if you have an idea, an invention, or whatever. There's money there sitting there to help entrepreneurs and help startups and help start new prototype work and all that. The problem is nobody's taking the money because nobody's coming in the front door. They've taught essentially a bunch of brilliant conformists. Now, having said that, I have to believe that if you don't like that and you're from India, you've come to the United States, because in the United States, that doesn't seem to be the case. So maybe what we're getting is we're getting all the people that felt contained and really wanted to think differently and have a broader acceptance of risk taking, and they came to the United States because the Indian population is kicked butt, in the United States as far as business operations, business startups, technology, and all that. But that was right from a gentleman who works with universities in India. So that everybody measures, the United States against everybody else. They're measuring that same rote memorized content, which is all historical content. It's the way engineering has always been, the way medicine's always been, the way law has always been, fill in the blank. There's not really a good track record or a way of measuring any countries that may or may not be doing this incubation thing where they're allowing creativity to flourish beyond elementary school.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, your background, of course, as from the military, is what most people would think the most structured of all. So, and obviously, I've heard people talk about that. If you're in the military, you don't have to make decisions on what you're having for breakfast or lunch or dinner or where you're going next or all of those things. But you were in a very unique situation because you're a Navy SEAL and also in combat. So how I, once again, I've talked to a few Navy SEALs, so I'm not gonna say my only experience is through movies, although that probably have more experience. That's where most people would. How much leeway did you guys have? I would guess that you had more than a common soldier in how to exercise a game plan, or in particular, when you got into a situation that was absolutely going to require some unique thought processes because of where you found yourself.
So SEALs were created in 1962, and up until the mid 80s, SEALs and Green Berets were called unconventional warfare. And that's a key. I make that point in the beginning of being I'm assuming it'd be different because we kind of knew what we were all about. We knew what our place was. Our place was to address, be assigned and address all the unconventional problems. Because if they're conventional problems, then the services with tanks or bombers or missiles or whatever, artillery, Marines hitting the beach, those are conventional assets and resources for conventional situations and problems. Unconventional problems, which have been around in every single war, tend to eventually generate an unconventional unit. You can find them all the way back in Alexander's day. There's carvings in ancient Assyrian, what do you call it? They're not really walls. They're killing castle walls or fortress walls that show these guys underwater breathing off of inflated sheep's bladders, approaching an enemy city. That's a long time ago. You're talking 5,000 years ago. So this has been around, right? But what happens, I think, back to the human nature kind of approach, after every war, the conventional forces always see these unconventional forces as either a threat or an untidy problem to be dealt with, and they get rid of them. And we did it with the French and Indian War. We did it after the American Revolution. We did it in the Civil War. We did it after World War I, and we did it after World War II. There were about 7 or 8 different kinds of special operations units in World War II, and they got rid of all of them except for the Frogmen. And there was another unit called Scouts and Raiders, which did the same thing as Navy SEALs. There was Alamo Scouts with the Army. There's all these different groups. The Marine Raiders, the Army had their own Raider group. So what happened in Vietnam was, hey, Kennedy said, we need some unconventional thinkers to handle an unconventional war. And he officially created the Green Berets and the SEALs in 1962. The reason I like unconventionality is unconventionality describes what SEALs and other special operations units do, and also the way they think, the way they solve problems. So if you're given a mission impossible with not very much good information, not very good intel, you're given 80% of what a conventional force would get. And that 80% is probably half realistic and the other half is on quicksand. And you're trained as a special operator, as a mission planner, to deal with that. You're trained to accept that. Here's the best you're going to get. You're going to get all this information. You have so much time to plan, and we get in a room, we just throw all the ideas out, on a whiteboard, whatever. And then we phase it out. There's a process of putting it, kind of dropping it into a mold, and we brief it, and somebody will say, approved. And then invariably, we take off, and as we're getting closer to the day and closer to the target, all that quicksand started to move around. And you got there, maybe 25% of all your assumptions are still correct, which means you end up doing a lot of pickup basketball when you get there. But even though it's pickup basketball, you still follow the planning process, even if you only have about 30 seconds to do it. It's more like, it's kids on the street, kind of like you go left, you go right, and I'll throw the ball that way. And unfortunately, more fortunately, that happens a lot in combat with special ops. More bad guys than you thought, no bad guy at all. Dogs, there always supposed to be dogs. the helicopter drops you off at the wrong place, and now you've got a 10-mile mountain march you're trying to make, over and over and over and over. So what you do as that kind of a thinker is you get better and better and better at managed risk taking, and also dealing with in the moment the crisis leadership or the chaotic leadership required to still execute and perform. And after 20 years of that, I mean, I had that pretty much burned into my brain. So it's much easier for me in business and in these books to anticipate that things are going to go wrong. The universe is going to change things. So if you're not constantly anticipating and having some kind of contingency thinking going on, or you're not training your people in a contingency way, then when a supply chain malfunction happens, it's a crisis and everybody's broken down and weeping and worried. They're not rolling up their sleeves, going into the room and throwing ideas on a whiteboard. But you can teach people to do that.
Okay, so that kind of brings up that takes us actually back to the very first book, because you mentioned some of those things, be nimble, and
Right.
that is how you're dealing with chaos and crises and opportunities that just arise or opportunities that go away. Learning to recognize those things, deal with those things, accept those things. I'm sure is part of it too. It makes it very difficult for leaders, especially in, you talked about robotics. Let's use right now with the one that's blowing up everywhere, and that's AI. As a leader right now of almost any industry, you have to determine, am I going to use it? When am I going to use it? Uh, you know, how is it going to integrate? Is it not? Whatever those things are. But that can be anything, right? That's just, I won't say it's the flavor of the month because it's a big thing happening right now, but there's always something that it seems like coming up with a crisis, maybe nothing greater in our lifetimes than the pandemic. But all of these things cause crisis and chaos. And so the book is about dealing with that, but more specifically dealing with that as a leader. And for you personally, your experience as a Navy SEAL helped you understand those things.
Correct. Because I was an enlisted SEAL for 10 years, and I was an officer for 10 years. And even as a senior enlisted, I was training the young officers on how to think this way, how to think unconventionally, how to be prepared for, you know, crisis and chaos to a normal person is a negative thing. Crisis and chaos to a special operations operator is an acceptable part of the job. That's already a given. They don't put SEALs and Green Berets into harm's way, into a place that's tranquil and peaceful and wonderful and perfect and all organized. You're going into a goofy place that doesn't make a lot of sense, and nobody else can do the job. That's why they've asked you to do it. And the odds of success are usually against you to some extent, and you're expected to overcome those odds and still execute and beat those odds. So training young guys as a senior enlisted guy, or training younger officers when I became a more senior as an officer, it's the same thing as training somebody in business. You just say, this is all the possible things that could go wrong. Let's get everybody in a room and we'll storyboard this thing out, and we'll basically do a tabletop exercise. I'll leave you in here for 4 hours, and this is what happened. We lost our number one client. You've got 4 hours to come up with how we're going to deal with this, and you walk out. Or we just lost our number one supplier. Or we just lost our number one salesperson that was responsible for 60% of all of our sales. These are all real things that happen in business all the time. They're so real that you would think that people would prepare for them. It's not, hey, I lost my sales guy. I've never in the last 30 years of my business experience ever heard of such a thing. What do we do? These are all predictable. It's human nature. It's the nature of business. It's the nature of the universe. And as leaders, you can prepare your organization, whatever your organization does, you can prepare them for all kinds of different scenarios. And you can sit down with everybody in a room and say, let's make the top 20 things that we think that would really be a big problem if we woke up on Monday morning and that was what was facing us. What's our internal black swan event? All right. The founder who knows where all the keys are, knows all the passwords, everything dies. A lot of small businesses, when that happens, everybody else doesn't know. They don't know how to operate the bank accounts. I mean, it just all stops. So you can do that. And then what are the external black swans? COVID's obviously a good example, but I mentioned a few before. Your supply chain gets disrupted. they jack you up on a huge increase in what they're going to charge you, which is going to have a equal and negative effect down your whole series of events to when you get to raise the prices on the customers. So you can do all this and you can think it through, just like military guys would think through an unconventional problem set. And you can do this once a month. Commit like 3 to 4 hours to just, you're brainstorming as a team, but what you're also doing is you're creating individual emotional maturity and psychological resilience to something that's going to happen. It is going to happen. So when the day happens, if you have a team trained like that, prepared like that, everybody looks at each other and says, okay, where are we going to meet? They don't look at everybody and go, what are we going to do? They're ready to function because their team is prepared. So being able talks a lot about that, talks a lot about cross-training people so you have depth and bench strength, not relying on that one superhero or that, whatever category they're in. And it's basically a guide to leaders that have either internal or external driven crises. And it could be a good one. It could be, we just got a huge client. Now what are we going to do? Right?
Yes.
And I know business right now. They just won a $132 million 5-year government contract. And it's going to be, okay, you got to run 50 of these training courses. Go. And they're like, oh, we got to staff up. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Do we have enough space? Yeah. So success can cause that same kind of chaos and crisis. It's not always just a negative thing.
Yeah, it is funny that you say that because I was thinking that, sometimes your wildest dream comes true. And then you're also going, ah, what will I do now? I can't believe we got that contract. What am I going to do?
You remember it was about 15 years ago, maybe there was a commercial and it showed these guys that they put something online just for sale. And they had a counter on the screen and they're all sitting there and it was day one and the counter went like, click. Yeah. Click, 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 click. Yeah. Click, 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 click. Yeah. Click, 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 click. And they all stopped and then started going like this. Oh my God. It was a good commercial for selling stuff online, but it was also a good demonstration of what happens when, oh my God, we're going to be too successful.
What are we going to do now? Yeah. And so down that road, let's touch on that for just a second, because I think then there's another inherent thing of sometimes those things can actually be flash in the pan, right? Whatever you came up with can be such a great idea, but someone else comes up with an idea that builds off of it and makes yours obsolete, or maybe whatever your widget was is now kind of obsolete because whatever it was fixing is not a problem anymore. This is something else that you need to, right? You need to keep thinking about what else. This is another part of what else could go wrong. Whatever my solution is could all of a sudden not be a solution anymore.
That's a great segue into my second book. So Be Visionary it starts out basically telling you, you have a past, you can go ahead and dream. It's not goofy or weird or anything like that. It's okay to dream, but you have to start pushing your thinking out to a horizon that's legitimately out there a way. So you can anticipate things, good things or bad things, threats or opportunities. And you have to put your head on a swivel, look 360 degrees. And a couple of chapters that kind of prepares you that, hey, this is okay. Then it teaches you how to do it. I do it every morning for about 10, 15 minutes at the most. I do it in my personal life and I do it in my writing and all that. And then I do it on my business side. And I just sit there and I push everything out about 2 years. What do I want to look like in 2 years? Am I on track for that? What do I want my family to be positioned or postured in 2 years? How about the company, the business? And then I start looking around and say, is there something coming at me that's going to intercept or interject in between me and this 24-month horizon? And what happens is if you do this every day, you don't have to sit in a lotus position or anything or put incense out, but you just do it, right? You do it in the morning before anything starts being thrown at you. And if you do it as a habit, what you'll find is pretty soon when things start being thrown at you during your day, either at work or personally, you start thinking of it in the context of now, in between now, and between now and the far horizon. You start thinking more strategically. You start thinking about, you become visionary in your approach to listening to challenges. Somebody wants to go let's hire somebody real quick. In your mind, if you're tactical and you're zoomed in all the time, it's, yeah, do them, put the Band-Aid on that thing. But if you're in this other mindset, wait a minute, what do we really need? We need a department of 3 people with two different kind of associated but totally different skill sets, and then somebody that can manage that whole area. Just grabbing a body and throwing it in there probably doesn't make sense. Let's think of it in a bigger picture way. And that's what Be Visionary was all about. And then eventually how to create a strategy from the vision, and then how to take that strategy and back plan from it and create an operational plan to execute. And some tips on how you can pitch it to the resource people, the people that are going to have to approve the budgets or whatever it is to get that vision rolling.
So I think a lot of people get lost in that. They sit there. First of all, no one has a attention span anymore, right? As they sit there trying to think about those things, all of a sudden the mind starts drifting to other things that really have nothing to do with it, right? Oh, wait, did I move those clothes over in the wash? That's not what we're doing right now, Harlan. Right now we're thinking about the next 24 months or your daily time. How are you overcoming that yourself? What methodology, if any, are you using, or have you just done it for so long now that you've just got patience with yourself to go through that?
I have belief in human nature, and one aspect of human nature is that if you practice a discipline, it eventually becomes a habit, then becomes just a part of what you do, right? So I think it's like the brush your teeth rule. Our parents are not hanging out in our house anymore telling us to brush our teeth. We're doing it. And so when I write books, I first started writing books, I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to find the time? And then I realized, all right, I'm going to change my schedule, because the only time for me that I'm going to have any vacuum that I can focus on anything is between 5 o'clock in the morning and about 6:30 in the morning. So I started getting up at 5 in the morning, getting my coffee, feeding my dog, and by 5:30 I was sitting in front of a laptop trying to write something. Same thing with working out. I thought, all right, if I write for about 45 minutes, then I'll work out for 45 minutes, take a shower, eat breakfast, and the sun's coming up and everybody else is coming awake, and I'm ready to start my regular job as a CEO. And it was hard in the beginning, but then it started to get to be okay, and it became normal. And then, like working out, if I went 2 days without writing, because I write 7 days a week, if I went 2 days without writing, I'd get that weird itch, like something's wrong. And I didn't force the writing. I'd write a paragraph or 2, and then if I started to kind of get mind muddled, I'd just walk away from it. And the next day I'd read what wrote the day before, and then I'd kick into gear. Sometimes I wrote a little more, sometimes I wrote less, but I wrote every single day. So writing 10 novels and 3 business books sounds crazy, but that's how I did it. I did it a little tiny bite at a time, every single solitary day. And I didn't believe in it really until I was about 2/3 of the way through the first book. And then I went, I'm actually going to finish this thing. This system is working, right? So what I do is, before I start writing or anything like that, I get my cup of coffee, feed the dog, I sit down, and I do that 10 to 15 minute thought practice. Then I write. I added it in there because I was in charge as a CEO of a management holding company. I was in charge of like 4 or 5 different business entities. And if I went into my day, say like 8:15 my phone would blow up, and there'd be, there's private equity guys on the board and everybody. And my head's just going all over the place, right? So I was in react mode. And I knew during the regular day, after the sun came out, I was not ever going to find, for all the reasons you mentioned, I was never going to find a moment of peace where I could actually sit there and think like that. So I started doing it in the morning, even before I did any writing, because I apply it to my writing, or I apply it to my public speaking, or so where I want to go with that, where am I? Where am I falling behind? Where am I falling short? Am I on track? And then I shift to my personal stuff, and then I shift to the business stuff. I don't necessarily take notes unless something really incredible pops in my head. And then when I'm done, I'll write it down. But I don't try to make it into an onerous, difficult thing to do. But if you do it every day, 7 days a week, So I have the trifecta now. I basically get up, I do that drill, I do my writing, I work out. So I've got 3 really, really positive personal, professional development things accomplished before the sun comes up.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Kind of back into that time period that you spent, and this kind of goes to your book, quite honestly, as well. If, in my opinion, and you tell me what your thought is on this, if you can't have this time looking ahead and the concern about what may be ahead, what happened in the next 24 months, if you don't keep up with what's going on. If you really don't know what's happening in your industry, what's happening around you, like you said, your head on a swivel 360, just looking around doesn't do it. A lot of times you have to spend a little bit of extra time kind of researching and looking at. I brought up AI earlier. It's not just AI, it's anything. If you're in a certain industry and you don't know what's going on in that industry or what's on the horizon for that industry, whether that is uh, public policy, whether that is competitors that could be on the horizon, new technologies that are out there. If you're not looking at that stuff, it's really hard to look at a realistic 24-month horizon.
Well, you can do that as part of your day job. It's different than the thinking part. It's different than the thought management and allowing yourself. It's because it goes to the creativity, right? The creativity starts to flow when you let your mind kind of
Sure.
off its gerbil wheel, and you don't try to make it come up with an answer. You let it wander a little bit. And if you find things that you're interested in, you can either task somebody with doing that. You can hire a consultant to look into it for it, or you can make that part of your day project. You can spend an hour every afternoon and try to dig into this thing. The here's the problem. If you don't do that, you're never going to see the train coming. You're never going to hear the train coming until it smacks you right between the eyes, and then it's over. It's too late. You become a BlackBerry or something.
Yeah.
The innovation you mentioned earlier, innovation is not invention. Innovation is making the great mousetrap a better mousetrap, and then somebody else comes along and makes it a bigger mousetrap. Somebody else turns it into a rat trap, and everybody's just innovating and tinkering and making it a little bit better. The greatest innovation in the world was taking the Model T and GM in the early days, putting color to it. Basically it was the same exact vehicle, but people wanted color, and Henry Ford said it'll come in any color as long as it's black. He thought that was really cute and everything, but that's about the time all the guys who used to work for him started eating his lunch and starting their own businesses. And in all those businesses, everything was about innovating on top of the Model T and the Ford in every different direction. It's the same story in all the technology in Silicon Valley. It's very rare that you see a true invention, something from out of whole cloth that just didn't exist. Almost everything is some kind of contraption of assembled thoughts, some of which could be 100 years old, some of it could be 50 years old. And they just thought it up, but they didn't really know how to go about doing it. And then somebody else later on, the technology exists. That's the problem with, saying static. I think I even have a quote and be different. Madame Curie, um, her quote was, "The universe abhors stasis." There's no such thing as static in the universe. So if you're static, you're operating and living contrary to all the atoms and all the molecules spinning around you. And there's somebody across town that's ready to eat your lunch and they've been figuring out how to do it, and you're not even aware of it. So if you're in business, you're in that kind of competitive environment, and you have a choice:
Yeah.
react to everything, keep your head in the sand, or change the way you think and start getting ready for that train.
So, we've talked a lot about leadership. Is leadership something that people are born with, or is it something people can learn? Because I've heard people say kind of both things. Oh, of course, he's a natural born leader, right? It's funny how many of those natural born leaders learned a whole lot of things. Let's be honest there, but effective, because there is leadership and there is effective leadership. What are your thoughts on that?
So be nimble. I gave my definition of leadership and management. And I think so. Management is, in my opinion, management is the skill and the ability to maintain systems and processes and talent, the talent to their resume, to what they've been trained to do, certified to do. And if something goes wrong with any of those three categories, systems, processes, or people, you basically go to the equivalent of some kind of instruction guide, and you do whatever the instruction guide says to fix the system, fix the process, or fix the person. And that is a maintenance function. And I think everybody can be taught to do that. You know, the schools, the B schools, they don't teach anything more than that kind of management. Now, having been in the military, I see the distinction of leadership being the ability to step up when everything's falling apart or something very important is falling apart and you can't manage your way out of it. So if your system completely fails and the instruction book doesn't help at all, and your plane shuts down, your car shuts down, your family shuts down, your business shuts down because of it, that requires somebody to step up and take a big look at all the issues and make sure that they're safe. What are the threats? Contain the threats, deal with the threats, address the threats, and then what do we do next to get ourselves out of this fix? That is not management. That particular function, that second one, the leadership function, I think is something that can evolve over time through confidence and through training, because it takes a lot of confidence to step up when that moment happens. The hypothetical, hero that steps up when somebody's trapped under a car, or steps up and starts giving orders, you call 911, you do this, get on him, CPR, okay, you get on. Okay, and let's say they have no training in it. They're not EMTs or anything like that. They had a situational awareness and a sense of poise in the moment of crisis that is also a human trait. It's not just a leadership trait. And maybe that's just the way their personality is, that they're comfortable when things are going crazy, maybe because their parents were that way and their parents didn't fly off the handle when everything went wrong. Maybe they had a boss that taught them, to not panic all the time. And so they appear as a natural leader. They just step out of nowhere and then they disappear when the crisis is over, right? In the military and in business and any kind of organizational focus of human effort, you can't just wait for somebody to happen to pop up, out of happenstance and say, hey, oh, thank God George in accounting knows how to fix this problem. He stepped right up and came in here. Look how poised he is. What you have to do is you have to cultivate leadership the way I defined it, and you have to train people to it. And part of those exercises I mentioned earlier, making them comfortable with chaos and crisis, giving them a method of solving that, either through prior contingency thinking and planning, preparation, or the ability to think through the problem set with real data, real time, not applying what just went sideways, so they can find a solution quickly and do that in a constructive way. That's a long way to answer your question. I don't think there's anybody born that's just a natural leader coming through the birth canal. I think the circumstances of their life gives them certain human aspects and characteristics that make them more poised, and more confident, and less panicky in a lot of situations. And if they get into the right, place in life where that is a valuable thing, then they can demonstrate that they have these traits. If they get into a profession where it's a mandatory thing, like the military or law enforcement, then you train those people and they tend to be better leaders than other people that are average leaders and some people that aren't that great at being leaders.
I agree with you, because I also think someone who has kind of those, I'm going to say innate, but a lot of times I believe that what happens there is their surroundings, in many cases, their upbringing, their opportunities, however you want to phrase that, have allowed them to see these things and overcome those things. They can see. I've heard a lot of people say this, and I noticed it was something that you had mentioned in some of the things that I read, that they don't see risk as risk; they see risk as opportunity. A lot of people, some very successful people, see risk as just better, greater opportunities, because they know many people won't do it. So they've already got rid of a whole lot of competition because people
Yeah.
are so adverse to risk. They're like, okay, so I don't have to worry about them. I just have to worry about the other people like me.
Well, like creativity, it's easy to throw out the nature nurture argument on leadership, because if you believe it's nature, then you're off the hook. You don't have to learn it. You don't have to demonstrate it, right? Same thing with creativity. If you think it's all gone by the time you're 8 years old, then you're off the hook. Not me. I don't have that DNA. I'll never be creative, or no, sorry, I can never be a leader. And I don't believe that. I just don't believe that. I think you're nurtured right out of the womb, and you're nurtured every step of the way in whatever direction to be a risk taker, to be poised and confident and mature, or the opposite of that, or somewhere in between. And maybe you don't ever have an event in your life that ever tests that, where you are in that spectrum or that range of training and ability. They force you to learn in the military, the conventional military and the special ops. You're put in leadership positions at every rank, and you're put in bad positions all the time in training, and you've got to cope and come up with something. So like the other contingency practice, you are honed as a leader, and you are either a good one, a moderate one, or you're not that great. And there's systems in the military that will note that in your annual reviews. And at some point you won't go up any higher in rank, and they'll say, you should probably go find something else to do, because we need good to great leaders, not average to bad leaders. But it's cultivated and it's addressed, as a systemic focus, unlike, say, corporate America or business in America.
So, is there, in your opinion, is there a difference between a leader and a thought leader? And can somebody be one and the other, or I personally think people can be both, and most of the time are both. But there are people who are good fundamental leaders, but not necessarily good strategists or thought leaders, in my opinion. I just want to, what is your thought on that?
I think the label gets tossed out too frivolously. It kind of waters down the value of it. If you're an influencer, that doesn't make you automatically a thought leader. That just means you're really good. You're saying something that's attracting a lot of eyeballs and clicks.
Yep.
But they wouldn't necessarily follow you into a burning fire, or into the next valley because you're out of food. I think the leaders still the key operational part of that label. A leader is somebody who takes what's not understood, or what is fractured, and maybe it was configured, now it's disconfigured. And if they're a thought leader, they take this thing as an abstract, and they come up with a new way, a new path, a new solution. And the solution may be the way it was is no longer going to be that way. Okay, so that's a great bumper sticker or Chinese fortune cookie, but that can be profound, because if it's true and nobody wants to listen to it, but it's still true, then you were a sage. You saw that we were at a crucible, or we were at a turning point, or a tipping point, or a pivot point, and you're the first one to basically say, I see this, I recognize this, and we should all be thinking about what this is going to mean. And maybe what I think it means is this. Now you're leading thought, right? You're leading them down a trail of thinking in a different way, perceiving the world, or whatever, business, etc., in a different way. A lot of stuff in politics are that way. You're trying to tell people, I think this is the path that the whole tribe should follow, because I believe where we are right now, we can't keep doing what we've been doing. So we need to change our stripes, or we need to change our habits, or we need to change our direction, or change our altitude, whatever it is, because where we are is not going to be a good place in a year or two. And we have enough time to be let out of this wilderness and get to the next best place. That's a thought and leader, right? So yeah, and that's much more profound and more valuable, and of greater depth than just an influencer.
No, I'm not the big fan of the influencer as a general term. I think there are some influencers that know what they're talking about, are influencing in a positive way, but as a general term, the term influencer is kind of drives me a little bit crazy right now. But
Yeah.
maybe it's my age showing.
I know. I mean, when people teach you or say something that is actually a lesson, then they're teachers, which still isn't a thought leader, right? And there's some great people out there saying things. They're from psychology or from philosophy or theology, and they're saying these things and applying them to our times. But basically, they're applying things that have been written down and codified before. It would be a thought leader would be somebody who comes in and says something and points to a points in a direction or down a path that hasn't necessarily been thought of before. That's why I think it's a more rare event in society to actually have one.
Yeah. So all planning in the world, all the sitting there, even daily like you do, going through, thinking of all the eventualities, uh, preparation, you still can meet failure. You can still can meet disappointment. Uh, no matter what your vision of things were, or even if you saw it coming, that didn't mean that it didn't happen. And those failures, especially for entrepreneurs, they seem to be more often than not the very greatest, most optimistic entrepreneurs then have no problem picking themselves up and going again. But a lot of folks then after that failure let fear eat them up. It just eats them up and they just cannot pull that trigger again in some cases. What advice do you have for folks that may be in that or maybe they've tried something, it's not working what they want to. It's not that they're afraid, but they've decided, you know what, maybe this entrepreneur stuff is a little too tough and I need to go back to a real job, as it were. But in essence, and I'm saying this in a real way, maybe we're missing out on something incredible because they're getting frustrated with situations, and with the right advice, maybe they would put their head down and just keep on powering through, and maybe that incredible invention is just, that just right around the corner. What advice can you give to those folks?
So the difference between a serial entrepreneur and an entrepreneur who quits is the second try. So I think it's a crisis of confidence, and fear is a symptom, but really it's a crisis of confidence and a misunderstanding of what the game's all about. The game is not about perfection. If you're going to take risks, you're going to risk failure also, not just success. And unless you were born into it, like in a family business, I don't care if you went to college, you come out, and you think, I took accounting, I'm going to open up an accounting firm. Okay. But if you've never run a business before and you don't ask anybody's help and nobody gives you any kind of tutoring or mentoring, you've got the same risk as anybody opening a restaurant of falling on your face. So the part that's missing from the dialogue, and not missing overseas, when you see people come over from overseas and they get into the United States, they just go nuts. They go, well, we'll start 5 businesses at the same time. We'll start 3 businesses at the same time. I'll own 2 or 3 other parts of other businesses. And if one fails, so what? You just keep going, rock and roll. And eventually one of them does well or 2 of them does well, then they sell them, then they take the money and build another business. And sometimes the businesses aren't even related, but
Right?
they're just going crazy because of the opportunity to start and own your own stuff and your own business and be your own person. And then in the United States, we've got this traditional thing where you go to school, you get good grades, go to school again, you get good grades. If you got good grades, somebody's going to hire you, you get a good job, and you get a good job, you're going to get promoted. You do a good job, you get promoted. And there's this linear mythology, which is put in all our heads before before we're basically 20 years old. And it's not a coincidence when you look at all the great entrepreneurs. If you look at the guys that started Microsoft, you look at Jobs, you look at Elon Musk, all these guys were in their early 20s, and a lot of them just quit, right? They just quit school, and they didn't care about school. They quit. They broke away from the linear path to traditional success and did what the hell they felt they should do, and they became, historical figures as entrepreneurs, right? And that's because of their personality, or maybe because of the way they were raised to follow their heart or whatever. But most of us aren't like that. Most of us are told boom, 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 boom. It's a linear, one step at a time. So when you fail, you think you failed. You think it's a forever fail. I'm going to get a job. I will never try to start another business in my entire life. And if you're 27 years old or 35 years old, your entire life is still like 3 more decades or 4 more decades to go.
Yeah.
It's a long time to condemn yourself to being a failure at something. And the ones that try a second time, they apply all their lessons learned. Even if it's a slightly different business, there's lessons learned about business, about raising money, about hiring people, about firing people, about picking a place to run your business. And maybe the first time you're a little bit more arrogant and you didn't listen to any advice, didn't seek any advice. Or maybe the first time you were so scatterbrained, you asked everybody for advice. And so you didn't have any, direction. Both of those things happen all the time with startups, all the time. And then you go off and you don't have much leeway in the beginning. So if you screw up, you could be over real fast. But then you sit back, and I used to manage money for United Bank of Switzerland for 8 years, high net worth individuals. About 40% of them were self-made multimillionaires, all high school graduates. And I'd say half of them at least had a bankruptcy story they would tell me. They acted like it was just going in and losing a fight as a professional boxer. They didn't look at it like, I can never box again. I'll never get in the ring again. They thought, okay, I'll lick my wounds. I'll go back. I'll get a better training program. I'll figure out what I did right, what I did wrong, and then I'll get back in the ring when I'm ready. Which is, sounds laissez-faire and kind of casual, but that's the difference between a serial entrepreneur and someone who quits after the first shot. They try the second shot, and they apply the lessons learned. And I think if more people did that, and if they could break out of this American mythology of the linear success story, the American dream was never linear up until probably the 1950s. Before the 1950s, it was kind of like, everybody coming from India and Asia and Central South America and Africa. It was like, wow, I get 40 acres. Wow, I can start my own gold mine, and they would just go for it. But, we got everybody traditionalized, and we got the school system traditionalized, and we got the workplace traditionalized, and creativity, innovation, those things that we talk about and be different about getting hammered out of you. Part of that is creativity is risk taking, and thinking that way is a risk sometimes. Definitely voicing it in different places could be a risk. So it all ties in, but that's what I would say to somebody. I mean, I've had this conversation a lot of times with people.
Yeah. Very, very cool. All right. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about your fiction books, because you have a series of fiction books as well, not just your 3 workbooks. So talk a little bit about what inspired you to write these, and a little bit about them in general, because I'm extremely intrigued about those, as I mentioned to you before we started actually recording. And there could be a lot of folks out there that are intrigued as well.
Sure. So when I was 50, I decided I want to get a black belt, and I went to a school that a friend of mine ran, and I picked Muay Thai boxing. And it took me 3.5 years to get to the level. They don't traditionally have a black belt in Thailand, but schools in the United States will give you something when you get to an instructor level. So in that 3.5 years, I had to learn that way of fighting. But I also, at 50 years old and being a CEO at the time, I had to deal with my own humility because I was being trained by a guy who had 100 professional fights and had also trained a lot of the big UFC names in Vegas at one time. And I didn't even lay a glove on him for like the first 9 months. I couldn't touch him. So not because he wouldn't let me touch him, I just couldn't touch him. And during that same time, I read The 4-Hour Workweek by, now I'm going to be upset because I can't remember the guy's name. But I will. The 4-Hour Workweek. And it's about looking at your life, looking at the use of your time, and running up your bucket list and then living your bucket list now, instead of waiting until you're too old to actually do half the things, or you're worried about the money because you have no other revenue stream. And I went ahead and read the book, and that's part of how I found the space for writing. I got rid of all the stuff I was doing in the morning that wasn't productive, and I restructured my day, and I came up with this thing. Because on top of my bucket list was I want to write a novel. All the rest stuff on the bucket list I had were things like learn to play guitar, learn to speak Spanish, and his examples in the book were all about traveling to places around the world. I've been over 40 countries, so that didn't work. But I read the book and I thought, okay, so I'm already going after my black belt or black belt equivalent. That's cool. I'm going to write a book. And I sat down and I thought, okay, if I'm going to write a book, what kind of book do I want to write? The obvious one is to try to write something about the SEALs. And, but I thought, that's kind of cliche. I want to have a free reign. I want to do something different. So I decided science fiction. And I picked time travel. And I thought, how can I apply? I actually wrote it down on a piece of paper. What are all the things I know a lot about? Well, I know a lot about fighting with weapons, without weapons. I know a lot about the martial spirit and about warriors and about, they call the SEALs the brotherhood, and about that camaraderie and that development from not knowing much to being a seasoned warrior. And I know about combat. So it's all right. How do I put that into a science fiction movie and not make it like, we're going to some crazy planet as a bunch of space marines or something, because that's already been done. And when I was done, I looked at the piece of paper and I said, okay, what if I took like mixed martial arts, fighting, and everything else that I have, and I put it in the future? How would that sit there? Because this is very primitive stuff, right? I mean, man to man, woman to woman combat with weapons, without weapons is kind of a primitive thing. It's not really a future thing. So I created a world that, in 2143, that was perfect. Cradle to grave coverage, and everything was taken care of for you, and you were given a job that gave you some, functionality. But in the age, life expectancy was 160 years old because of the health in it. But the number one cause of death was suicide, because people were killing themselves because they had no passion, they had no purpose. And it turns out that the human spirit requires some kind of resistance. It needs some kind of traction, some kind of friction, or else it just starts to eat up on itself. So the government opened up time tourism, and these corporations created these guilds, the Iron Guild, the Bronze Guild, whatever. And they would run like mixed martial arts training schools. You had to be trained up. You had to use the equipment from the actual era you were going to go back to. And then they would go back to ancient Romans and Egyptians or whatever, and they would be injected into scenarios where they would end up fighting. And I could take everything that was on that piece of paper and I could incorporate that. And I took a young man who was a content creator, so basically same meaning as today, and he was actually highly paid, because that was like one of the rarest things, was somebody come up with an idea that other people would find new and exciting. And his best friend, who was kind of a big muscular guy who wanted to get into one of these guilds, and he talked him into it. And so through the course of 4 books in the series, he goes from being a content creator who's not martial or athletic in any way into this seasoned warrior. Then he eventually becomes a major mover in that world in 2043. And that was cool because I was able to develop and grow them. Like I said, I trained officers, I trained SEALs. I've been trained, so I could wrap all that in there. And after about the 3rd book in the 4-book series, I decided, okay, I'm gonna take a stab at a SEAL book. So same kind of theme. Young officer, Lieutenant JG. First book starts off, he's at Buzz. He's in the last phase of the 6-month course, getting ready to do the final exercise. There's lots of doubts about his abilities and all that. And then he eventually evolves in the 1st book. And then by the 3rd book, he's a Navy Cross winner, and he's cashiered out of the military because he's got traumatic brain injury and PTSD and everything. So the 3rd book, he's out of uniform and he's dealing with all that. And it's a kind of a book of redemption, because a friend of his daughter is kidnapped in Hawaii. So it's human trafficking, and he ends up grabbing some other guys, and they have to hunt down and do that. And so the 4th and 5th book in that series is him. I still out of uniform, but he's a SEAL, and he's breaking in ex-FBI guys and stuff. And they're going in there, they're solving problems, kind of Mission Impossible problems. And obviously this is what's given him a sense of purpose again. And all that. So there's 5 books in the SEAL series. The 5th one came out last year in the summer, and there's 4 books in the Time Warrior sagas. series, and all the proceeds go to the SEAL Veterans Foundation to work on PTSD and traumatic brain injury.
Well, very, very cool. And so, folks, if you want to go out and check those out, you can go to martystrong.com and you can find the Be Nimble book there. You can find the Be Visionary. And then also you can pre-order right now, right? You can pre-order
Right.
the newest book, Be Different, that is coming out on in just a few days on December 1st. Also, you can, of course, give the links to the Time Warrior series and then the SEAL Strike series. Marty, man, I have really enjoyed speaking with you, buddy. We have touched on a whole lot of different things, and I sure hope that the folks listening out there have picked up some nuggets that can help them along their journey as well.
Yeah, the pregame talk was fun too.
Yeah, absolutely, it was. Now, man, I really do appreciate you taking time to spend with us. All the best in the future, and maybe whenever this latest book comes out here in a little while, you can come back and visit with us and talk a little bit about that because I don't want to spill any beans on this deal, but that sounds like a pretty cool thing you got going too, buddy.
Yeah, the 10th novel. Yeah,
Yeah,
looking forward to
absolutely.
that.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate you being on here, Marty.
Thanks, Harlan. Take care.
All right, folks, that wraps up this edition of the Health and Well Power Hour. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget, we also have our monthly podcast on LinkedIn called Why Does Healthcare Suck? That's right. Why Does Healthcare Suck? As we talk about all the craziness in the U.S. healthcare system and how to navigate that in a much better way. Appreciate everyone being here. We'll catch you next time on the Health and Well Power Hour. We are out of here.